Chapter 1: Brothers Across the Divide. For words arrived at the edge of Ultramar in early 42,026, encrypted in codes only a Primarch would recognize. The message came from Lion L. Jonson, first of the Emperor's sons, addressed to Roboute Guilliman, Lord Regent of the Imperium. It read simply, "Brother, we need to talk." For Guilliman, this was the first confirmation that another loyal Primarch walked among the living. For the Imperium, teetering on the edge of extinction, it represented something humanity desperately needed, proof that legends could return. Two Primarchs now stand ready for war in a galaxy that has become unrecognizable from the one they once knew. The Lion operates in Imperium Nihilus, the dark half of the galaxy severed from terror by the great rift known as the Cicatrix Male Dictum. Guilliman rules from the throne world itself, bearing the crushing weight of an Imperium that transformed into a theocratic nightmare during his 10,000-year absence. Their reunion represents more than a family meeting. It signifies a potential turning point in a long war, a chance to coordinate the efforts of two demigods against enemies that have grown catastrophically powerful during their absence. Before we explore what they might discuss and how they might reshape the Imperium's future, I want to ask you this: what do you think should be their first priority when they meet? Should they focus on military strategy, resolving their past tensions, or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you find value in these deep dives into Warhammer lore, consider subscribing so we can explore more of these critical moments together. The Lion's return to the material universe came without fanfare or grand announcement. He awakened on Kamath, a devastated world in Imperium Nihilus, with no memory of how he arrived there. After the destruction of Caliban and his disappearance at the end of the Horus Heresy, Lion L. Jonson had spent 10,000 years in a state that defied conventional understanding. He was not in stasis like Guilliman, nor was he simply lost in the warp. Instead, he wandered what he calls the interdimensional woods, a space between reality and unreality that changed him profoundly. When he emerged, he discovered an Imperium that had become everything he and his brothers fought to prevent, a decaying theocracy held together by fear, superstition, and ritual. The Lion who returned was not the same man who vanished during the heresy. Mike Brooks' novel Son of the Forest portrays a Primarch who has undergone significant character development. The old Lion was known for his secrecy, his pride, and his occasional conflicts with his brothers. The new Lion demonstrates maturity, empathy, and a slower temper. When he learned that Guilliman still lived, observers noted immense relief radiating from him. This suggests that despite their complicated history, the Lion genuinely values his brother's survival. He has also made controversial decisions that the old Lion would never have considered. He now works alongside some of the fallen, those dark angels who sided with Luther during the Legion's civil war. Rather than continuing the Dark Angels' 10,000-year hunt for these knights, the Lion has chosen redemption over vengeance for those who were merely caught on the wrong side rather than true traitors to the Imperium. The Lion's campaign in Imperium Nihilus has been nothing short of remarkable. He defeated Angron, the demon Primarch of the World Eaters, in single combat on the world that was once Caliban. Using a combination of his formidable combat skills and new supernatural abilities gained during his otherworldly wandering, he banished the demon Primarch back to the warp. He wields the Emperor's shield, a relic of immense power capable of turning aside even demon blades. Rather than immediately revealing himself to the wider Imperium, the Lion chose to operate in secrecy, coordinating forces to protect Imperial enclaves in the benighted region cut off from Terra's light. This approach reflects both his traditional preference for working from the shadows and a pragmatic understanding that the Imperium's bureaucracy might hinder rather than help his efforts. Guilliman's situation presents a stark contrast to the Lion's freedom of movement. The Lord Regent returned to life in the early days of the 42nd millennium, awakened from stasis by the machinations of Belisarius' call and the intervention of the Eldari. What he discovered horrified him. The Imperium had transformed his father into a god, twisted the imperial truth into its exact opposite, and created a galaxy-spanning theocracy that would have disgusted the Emperor himself. Yet Guilliman could not simply tear down this corrupt structure because it was the only thing keeping humanity from complete extinction. He became Lord Regent, shouldering administrative and military burdens that would break lesser beings. His internal monologues, as portrayed in various Black Library novels, reveal a man filled with exhaustion and crushing loneliness. The burden Guilliman carries is fundamentally different from the Lion's mission. Where the Lion can operate with relative autonomy, choosing his battles and methods, Guilliman must maintain the entire imperial apparatus. He must deal with the Adeptus Ministorum, the Highbound Mechanicus, the Suspicious Inquisition, and countless other factions that view any change as heresy. He has attempted to bring the Imperium's governance from horrific dystopian nightmare down to acceptable levels, but progress comes painfully slowly. The Indomitus Crusade, his great military effort to reclaim lost worlds and reinforce beleaguered systems, has achieved victories but at staggering cost. Meanwhile, he knows that somewhere across the Great Rift, Imperial citizens suffer in darkness, cut off from reinforcement and hope. The history between these two Primarchs adds layers of complexity to their impending reunion. During the Horus Heresy, their relationship evolved through cooperation, tension, and ultimately shared trauma. The most controversial chapter of their brotherhood was Imperium Secundus, Guilliman's attempt to create a second Imperium on Ultramar when the Ruin Storm cut off all communication with Terra. With no astropathic messages reaching him and no light of the Astronomicon to guide ships, Guilliman concluded that the Emperor might have fallen and the Imperium might lie in ashes. His response was to consolidate Ultramar into the nucleus of a new Imperium, preserving what he could of his father's vision. This decision has been interpreted in multiple ways throughout Imperial history. Some view it as pragmatic contingency planning, an effort to save what could be saved if Terra truly had fallen. Others see it as revealing darker ambitions, a power-hungry son seizing opportunity to build his own empire. The truth likely lies somewhere between these extremes. Guilliman genuinely believed he was preserving the Imperium's legacy, yet he also assumed leadership with striking readiness. When asked if he was declaring himself the new emperor, his response suggested someone comfortable with supreme authority, "I am the Imperium." He even acknowledged to his officers that he was prepared to fight against loyalist brothers who might oppose his decisions, and that when declaring Imperium Secundus official, he was ready to kill anyone who stood in his way. The Lion participated in Imperium Secundus but with clear reservations. Historical accounts suggest tension between the two brothers during this period. The Lion humbled Guilliman at some point during these events, though the exact circumstances remain unclear in available sources. What is known is that Sanguinius, the third Primarch present in Ultramar, served as a moderating influence between them. When they eventually learned that Terra still stood and the Emperor still lived, through a combination of Sanguinius' visions and the precognitive abilities of the captured traitor Conrad Kurz, Guilliman was mortified at everything he had done based on false assumptions. The three Primarchs immediately departed for Terra, fighting together through the Ruin Storm to reach their father. Their relationship improved significantly during the final approaches to Terra and the siege itself. They realized the true scope of the threat and fought closely together to ensure Sanguinius could confront Horus. There was shared grief after the Emperor's internment on the Golden Throne. In one telling moment, the Lion sought out Lemon Russ not to reconcile but to pick a fight so they both might die, but instead they merely wounded each other badly enough for hospital stays. This reveals the psychological state of the surviving Primarchs in the immediate aftermath of the heresy, traumatized, grieving, uncertain how to continue in a galaxy that had fundamentally changed. Now, 10,000 years later, both brothers have changed in ways that might actually make cooperation more feasible than it would have been during the heresy. The Lion has matured significantly, becoming more empathetic and less prone to the pride that once defined him. Guilliman has been humbled by the reality of the Imperium he inherited and the limits of his ability to change it. Both carry the weight of immense responsibility and the loneliness of being one of the last loyal sons of the Emperor. When they meet, they will likely recognize in each other a desperation for brotherhood that transcends their past disagreements. The strategic implications of their coordination cannot be overstated. Guilliman possesses the administrative authority and resources of the Imperium proper, but he is tied to Terra and the wider galactic infrastructure. The Lion possesses tactical flexibility and the ability to operate in Imperium Nihilus where Guilliman's resources struggle to reach. A division of labor seems logical. Guilliman continues managing the Imperium's administration and leading campaigns in Imperial space, while the Lion focuses on making Imperium Nihilus more survivable and countering specific threats like Angron. The Lion has no interest in administrative work and will likely leave such matters entirely to Guilliman, meaning their responsibilities will not conflict. Commander Dante of the Blood Angels represents an interesting connection between the two Primarchs. Guilliman named Dante as Lord Regent of Imperium Nihilus, giving him authority over that dark region. Recent sources indicate that Dante maintains contact with both Primarchs. This suggests that communication between the two halves of the Imperium, while difficult, is not impossible. Dante's position also means that any coordination between Guilliman and the Lion will need to account for the command structure already established in Imperium Nihilus. The Lion's tendency to operate independently may create friction with existing authority, or it may prove to be exactly what that region needs, a Primarch unburdened by bureaucratic constraints. The message the Lion sent, "Brother, we need to talk," is notable for its directness and informality. This is not a formal communique between military commanders. It is a personal message between brothers who have been separated for 10 millennia. The phrasing suggests urgency but also a desire for genuine communication rather than simple military coordination. The Lion could have sent strategic intelligence or requests for resources. Instead, he asked for conversation. This implies that he recognizes the need for something beyond tactical discussion, a reckoning with their shared past, an acknowledgement of their present circumstances, and a negotiation about their vision for humanity's future. What exactly will they discuss when they finally meet face to face? The military situation certainly demands attention, the deployment of forces, the allocation of resources, the identification of priority threats. But their conversation will inevitably touch on deeper matters, the nature of the Imperium itself, their father's vision versus the theocratic reality, the question of whether humanity can be saved or merely prolonged in its suffering. The Lion has shown disdain for what the Imperium has become, calling it a hollow thing, rotted within, held together by ritual and fear. Guilliman shares this assessment but understands the necessity of maintaining the system despite its corruption. How will they reconcile these perspectives? The galaxy they now face is worse than anything either Primarch could have feared during the heresy. Demon Primarchs walk reality freely. The Great Rift has literally torn the Imperium in half. Entire sectors have fallen to chaos, Xeno's threats multiply, and humanity's resources are stretched thinner than ever. Yet their return provides something desperately needed: hope. The Imperium's propaganda machine has already begun spreading tales of the returned Primarchs, proof that the Emperor's greatest champions are not all gone forever. Whether this hope is justified or merely another lie to keep humanity fighting remains to be seen. As Chapter 1 closes, we understand the basic situation: two brothers, separated by a galaxy and 10,000 years of divergent experiences, are about to reconnect. One has awakened to find himself trapped in administrative hell, trying to govern an empire that betrayed everything he believed in. The other has awakened to find himself alone in the darkest region of space, fighting enemies without the support structure he once took for granted. Both have matured and changed. Both carry grief, exhaustion, and responsibility beyond measure. Both desperately need what the other represents: connection, understanding, shared purpose, but understanding their present situation is only the beginning. To truly grasp what this reunion means, we must go deeper into their individual journeys. What exactly did the Lion experience during his 10,000-year absence? How did Guilliman's awakening transform his understanding of the Imperium he helped build? And what tensions from their past still simmer beneath the surface, waiting to complicate their brotherhood? These questions lead us into Chapter 2, where we explore the personal transformations that will shape how these two Primarchs approach their historic meeting. Chapter 2: The Transformed Sons. 10,000 years changes everything, even beings designed to be eternal. When Lion L. Jonson disappeared at the end of the Horus Heresy, he was a warrior defined by secrecy, strategic brilliance, and uncompromising pride. When he returned in the 42nd millennium, he brought with him abilities and perspectives that no other Primarch possessed. His transformation occurred in a place that defies conventional physics, the interdimensional woods, a realm between the material universe and the warp where time flows differently and reality bends. What happened to him there remains partially mysterious even to the Lion himself, but the results are undeniable. The Lion emerged with supernatural abilities that blur the line between warpcraft and something else entirely. He can move through forests with preternatural speed, appearing and disappearing as if the trees themselves carry him. He demonstrated these powers during his confrontation with Angron on the remains of Caliban, where he used the terrain itself as a weapon against the demon Primarch. These abilities do not appear to be psychic powers in the traditional sense, nor are they the corrupting gifts of chaos. Instead, they seem connected to the natural world, to ancient forces that existed before the Emperor's Great Crusade reshaped the galaxy. The Emperor's shield, which the Lion now carries, amplifies these abilities while providing protection against demonic corruption. His time in the interdimensional woods also changed the Lion's character in profound ways. Mike Brooks' novel Son of the Forest portrays a Primarch who has developed empathy and emotional intelligence that the old Lion lacked. He listens to mortal humans now, genuinely considers their perspectives, and shows patience with their limitations. When he works alongside the Risen, those fallen dark angels who he has chosen to forgive and redeem, he does so with understanding rather than judgment. This represents a complete reversal of the Dark Angel's traditional approach, which involved hunting down every fallen with obsessive determination and executing them without mercy for the sin of being on Caliban when it exploded. The decision to work with the Fallen is perhaps the clearest evidence of the Lion's transformation. For 10,000 years, the Dark Angels Legion and its successor chapters maintained a dark secret. Their homeworld was destroyed in a civil war between loyalists and those who followed Luther, the Lion's adoptive father and second-in-command. The surviving Dark Angels hunted the Fallen across time and space, willing to abandon Imperial citizens and even allow entire worlds to burn if it meant capturing one of their traitorous brothers. They did this because they feared what the wider Imperium would think if the truth emerged, that the First Legion, supposedly the most loyal, had been divided against itself. The Lion returned to find this secret-keeping had poisoned his legion's effectiveness and distorted their priorities beyond recognition. His response was pragmatic and merciful. He evaluated each Fallen individually. Those who had genuinely fallen to chaos or committed atrocities faced his judgment and death. Those who had simply been caught on the wrong side during Caliban's destruction, or who had been misled by Luther's charisma, were offered redemption. He renamed these redeemed warriors the Risen and incorporated them into his new force. This decision demonstrates remarkable character growth for a Primarch who was once defined by his inability to forgive perceived betrayals. The Lion's campaign in Imperium Nihilus has been methodical and effective despite operating with limited resources. After awakening on Kamath, he did not immediately rush to announce his presence or seek out the wider Imperium. Instead, he began gathering intelligence, recruiting forces, and identifying critical threats. His operational style reflects both his traditional preference for secrecy and a new understanding that sometimes the best way to help is to work quietly rather than create bureaucratic complications. He has protected multiple Imperial worlds from chaos incursions, coordinated disparate Imperial forces that had been cut off from central command, and even established covert communication networks in a region where astropathic messages struggle to penetrate the Great Rift's interference. His victory over Angron deserves detailed examination because it reveals the Lion's evolved combat philosophy. Angron, the demon Primarch of Khorne, is one of the most dangerous entities in the galaxy. Elevated to demonhood during the Horus Heresy, he has spent 10,000 years becoming an ever more perfect instrument of violence and rage. When Angron manifested on the world that had once been Caliban, he brought with him legions of diamonds and berserkers intent on turning the region into a killing field. The Lion could have attempted to meet him in direct combat, Primarch against Primarch, blade against blade. This would have been the old Lion's approach: meet strength with strength, prove superiority through martial prowess. Instead, the Lion used terrain, tactics, and his new abilities to create conditions favorable for victory. He drew Angron into forests where his new powers gave him advantages, disrupted the demon's reinforcements, and struck at moments of maximum efficiency rather than maximum honor. When the final confrontation came, the Lion wielded the Emperor's shield alongside his traditional weapons, using the relic's anti-demon properties to negate some of Angron's supernatural advantages. The result was not a glorious duel for the ages, but an effective banishment that sent Angron screaming back to the warp and saved countless Imperial lives. This pragmatic approach to combat represents growth from a Primarch who once cared deeply about martial reputation and who had fought his brother Lemon Russ in a pointless duel simply to prove who was the better warrior. While the Lion was wandering between dimensions, Roboute Guilliman lay in stasis, poisoned by the demon Primarch Fulgrim's blade at the end of the scouring. The wound would not heal naturally, so his sons preserved him in a stasis field on Macragge, creating a shrine where pilgrims could view the avenging sun in his eternal sleep. Guilliman spent no subjective time in stasis. From his perspective, he closed his eyes after Fulgrim's betrayal and opened them 10,000 years later to a galaxy he could barely recognize. The psychological shock of this instant transition cannot be overstated. Guilliman's awakening was orchestrated by Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call and facilitated by the Eldari, specifically the Inari faction led by Yvraine. This fact alone would have troubled Guilliman. He was revived through a combination of potentially heretical technology and Xeno's witchcraft, the very things his father had warned against. But the circumstances were dire enough that his sons judged such measures necessary. The 13th Black Crusade had torn the galaxy apart, creating the Cicatrix male dictum and cutting the Imperium in half. Macragge itself was under assault by Chaos forces. The Ultramarines needed their Primarch, regardless of the questionable methods required to wake him. What Guilliman discovered upon awakening filled him with horror and disgust. The Imperium had transformed his father, the Emperor of Mankind who explicitly rejected religious worship and championed reason over superstition, into the central deity of a galaxy-spanning religion. The imperial cult dominated every aspect of imperial life, declaring that the emperor was divine, that faith was stronger than reason, and that humanity's suffering was necessary for spiritual purification. This represented everything the Emperor fought against during the Great Crusade. Guilliman himself had crafted the imperial truth alongside his father, the philosophical framework that declared there were no gods, only powerful beings that pretended to divinity to enslave humanity. The Adeptus Ministorum, the ecclesiarchy that administered the imperial cult, wielded immense power throughout the Imperium. They controlled entire armies through the Adeptus Auroritas, influenced planetary governors through religious authority, and could declare entire populations heretical if they deviated from approved doctrine. They taught that suffering was holy, that knowledge was dangerous, and that the Emperor's plan required humanity to remain ignorant and obedient. Guilliman recognized this as precisely the kind of institutional corruption his father despised, yet he could not simply abolish the ecclesiarchy because billions of imperial citizens genuinely believed in the imperial cult and would view its destruction as ultimate heresy. The Adeptus Mechanicus presented another frustration. During the Great Crusade, the Mechanicum had been allies who maintained dangerous independence but at least pursued technological advancement. 10,000 years later, the Adeptus Mechanicus had calcified into a dogmatic priesthood that treated technology as religious artifacts rather than tools to be understood. They had forgotten more than they remembered about how their own equipment functioned. They viewed innovation as heresy and maintained their machines through ritual rather than comprehension. Guilliman, who valued logic and efficiency, found himself negotiating with tech priests who insisted on performing 12-hour consecration rituals before repairing critical equipment. The imperial bureaucracy had metastasized into a nightmare of inefficiency. Simple decisions required approval from dozens of departments, each jealously guarding their authority. Resources were misallocated on staggering scales because no single authority could see the full picture. Corruption was endemic because the system was too complex for effective oversight. Guilliman tried to implement reforms and found himself blocked at every turn by factions that viewed any change as threatening their power. He possessed ultimate authority in theory, but in practice, he discovered that changing the Imperium's course was like trying to steer a continent-sized ship using only his hands. The military situation was catastrophic. The Great Rift divided the Imperium into two halves, with Imperium Nihilus, the dark side, cut off from most reinforcement and supply. Demon Primarchs led massive chaos invasions. Orc wars consumed entire sectors. The Tyranids approached in numbers that suggested the previous hive fleets were merely scouting forces. The Necrons awakened from their ancient slumber with technology that made Imperial weapons look primitive. The Tau expanded their empire with concerning speed. And everywhere, always, the Imperium's own forces were insufficient, outdated, and hampered by dogmatic thinking that rejected tactical flexibility. Guilliman's response was characteristically comprehensive. He launched the Indomitus Crusade, a massive military campaign intended to reclaim lost worlds, reinforce beleaguered sectors, and push back the Imperium's countless enemies. He deployed the Primarch Space Marines, Belisarius calls enhanced version of the Astartes that Guilliman himself had commissioned during the heresy, as a contingency plan. He attempted to reform imperial governance, create more efficient command structures, and eliminate the worst excesses of bureaucratic bloat. He worked to maintain the Imperium as a functional entity rather than a slowly dying corpse held together by ritual and fear, but the cost was crushing loneliness and exhaustion. Guilliman found himself surrounded by people who either worshipped him as a demigod or feared him as a tyrant. He could not simply have a conversation with someone who saw him as an equal, because no one in the Imperium viewed him that way. His fellow Primarchs were dead or missing or corrupted. The Emperor himself, when Guilliman finally visited the throne room, communicated only in ways that suggested the being on the Golden Throne might not be entirely human anymore. Guilliman was functionally alone, carrying burdens that would break any normal human, with no one to share them. The contrast between the Lion's and Guilliman's experiences becomes starkest when we compare their freedom of action. The Lion operates in Imperium Nihilus with remarkable autonomy. He chooses his battles, selects his methods, and works without needing to justify his decisions to bureaucratic overseers. If he wants to work with redeemed fallen, he does so without requiring approval from the High Lords of Terror. If he needs to abandon one front to address a more critical threat, he simply moves his forces. He has rebuilt himself into a force of nature, appearing when needed and disappearing when his work is done. Guilliman has no such luxury. Every decision he makes creates ripples throughout the imperial bureaucracy. If he wants to deploy forces to a particular war zone, he must navigate complex political considerations about which factions control those forces and what concessions they will demand in exchange. If he wants to implement a reform, he must convince or compel dozens of resistant institutions to accept changes they view as heretical. He cannot simply appear and solve problems through personal intervention because the Imperium is too vast and too complex for one person to manage, even a Primarch. He must work through systems that actively resist his efforts to improve them. Yet both brothers share fundamental similarities in their present circumstances. Both awoke to an Imperium that betrayed their father's vision. Both carry responsibility for regions of space containing billions of human souls. Both fight wars on multiple fronts against enemies more numerous and powerful than anything they faced during the heresy. Both suffer from isolation, surrounded by people who cannot truly understand their perspective or share their burdens. Both have matured through their experiences, developing new understanding of leadership, sacrifice, and the limits of individual power. Their impending meeting represents the first time in 10,000 years that either will speak with someone who truly understands what it means to be a loyal son of the Emperor in this nightmare galaxy. They will not need to explain the weight of command or the frustration of trying to save an empire that resists being saved. They will not need to hide their doubts or maintain facades of perfect confidence. They can simply be brothers again, sharing their experiences and supporting each other through honest communication. This emotional reunion may ultimately matter more than any strategic coordination they arrange. The transformation of both Primarchs creates conditions for productive cooperation that would not have existed during the heresy. The old lion was too proud and secretive, unwilling to fully trust even his brothers. The old Guilliman was too certain of his own correctness, sometimes dismissing other perspectives as less logical than his own. The new lion has learned humility and empathy through his otherworldly experiences. The new Guilliman has learned the limits of pure reason and the necessity of compromise through his encounters with the Imperium's bureaucratic reality. They are both better equipped now to work together than they ever were before, but transformation does not erase history. The shadows of Imperium Secundus still linger, raising questions about ambition, loyalty, and the meaning of brotherhood under impossible pressure. Their reunion will force both Primarchs to confront not just their present challenges but also their shared past and the unresolved tensions that come with it. In Chapter 3, we will explore those historical complications and examine how two brothers who once stood on opposite sides of a controversial decision might reconcile their different perspectives on what loyalty to the Imperium actually means. Chapter 3, Shadows of Imperium Secundus. History does not disappear simply because 10,000 years have passed. The events of Imperium Secundus cast long shadows across the relationship between Roboute Guilliman and Lionel Jonson, raising questions about ambition, loyalty, and the nature of duty when circumstances become impossibly complex. To understand what their reunion truly means, we must examine what happened when these two Primarchs last worked together under crisis conditions. The story begins with the Ruin Storm, a massive warp phenomenon created by the traitor forces during the Horus Heresy that cut Ultramar off from the rest of the galaxy. The Ruin Storm was not merely a navigation hazard. It was a deliberate act of sorcery engineered by the traitor legions to isolate loyalist forces and prevent them from reinforcing terror during the final confrontation. Warp travel became nearly impossible within the storm's boundaries. Astropathic communication failed completely, leaving entire sectors blind and deaf to what was happening elsewhere in the galaxy. For Guilliman, commanding the Ultramar region with the largest intact loyalist fleet and legion, this silence was agonizing. He sent scouts and messengers toward Terra repeatedly, but none returned with information. The Astronomican's light, which normally guided ships through the warp, had vanished from their perception. Guilliman faced a terrible calculation. Without information from Terra, he had to make decisions based on incomplete data and worst-case assumptions. The silence could mean that Terra still stood but communication was merely blocked. It could also mean that the Emperor had fallen, the traitors had won, and the Imperium was already ashes. Guilliman chose to prepare for the worst possibility. If Terra had fallen, then Ultramar would become humanity's last hope, the seed from which a new Imperium could grow. He began consolidating military forces, establishing defensive positions, and implementing administrative reforms to make Ultramar self-sufficient. These were reasonable preparations for an uncertain situation, but Guilliman went further than mere contingency planning. He formally declared the creation of Imperium Secundus, a second Imperium with Ultramar as its capital. He established governmental structures, created new administrative hierarchies, and began functioning as the leader of an independent empire rather than a regional commander awaiting orders from Terra. This decision transformed practical preparations into something that looked disturbingly like a power grab. The declaration of Imperium Secundus was not a private contingency plan, it was a public announcement that Guilliman was creating an alternative center of imperial authority. The Lion arrived in Ultramar during this period, along with Sanguinius of the Blood Angels. Both had escaped the Ruin Storm's trap through different routes and brought their forces to Guilliman's territory seeking coordination and information. The Lion's reaction to Imperium Secundus was complicated by his own nature and experiences. He understood the practical necessity of Guilliman's preparations, recognizing that doing nothing while waiting for information from Terra could result in complete collapse if the worst had indeed occurred. But the Lion also possessed keen instincts for detecting hidden motivations and alternative agendas, instincts honed through years of serving as the Emperor's exterminator, the one sent to destroy threats too dangerous for public acknowledgement. What troubled the Lion was not that Guilliman prepared for contingencies, but how readily he assumed supreme authority. When establishing Imperium Secundus, Guilliman demonstrated no hesitation about placing himself at its center. He did not create a collective leadership structure or defer decisions to group consensus. Instead, he built a governmental system with himself as its absolute ruler, justified by his administrative genius and strategic vision. When questioned about whether he was declaring himself emperor, Guilliman's response revealed his mindset: "I am the Imperium." This was not merely confidence, it suggested someone who had internalized the idea that his judgment and authority were synonymous with the Imperium's continued existence. The Lion participated in Imperium Secundus but remained wary throughout the process. Historical accounts indicate significant tension between the two Primarchs during this period, though the exact details vary depending on the source. What is clear is that at some point, the Lion humbled Guilliman in a confrontation that forced the Lord of Ultramar to reconsider his position and approach. The nature of this humbling is not fully detailed in available sources, but it appears to have involved the Lion challenging Guilliman's assumptions and perhaps threatening to oppose Imperium Secundus if it continued down paths the Lion considered treasonous. Sanguinius played a crucial role as mediator between his brothers during this tense period. The Angel possessed qualities that both Guilliman and the Lion respected: martial prowess that equaled their own, strategic insight that matched Guilliman's planning abilities, and emotional intelligence that surpassed both of them. When tensions between the two threatened to explode into open conflict, Sanguinius intervened with both diplomatic skill and genuine authority. He understood Guilliman's burden of responsibility and the fear that drove his contingency planning. He also understood the Lion's suspicions and the dangers of appearing to abandon the Emperor while he might still live. The solution Sanguinius proposed was elegant and strategically sound. If Imperium Secundus needed a leader, it should not be Guilliman. Instead, Sanguinius himself would serve as the symbolic head of this contingency empire, while Guilliman and the Lion would serve as his primary advisors and military commanders. This arrangement addressed multiple concerns simultaneously. It removed the appearance that Guilliman was seizing power for personal ambition. It placed someone universally respected at the center of imperial authority. It created a leadership structure that required consensus among three Primarchs rather than the unilateral decisions of one. Guilliman accepted this arrangement, though sources suggest he did so with some reluctance. The revelation that Terra still stood and the Emperor still lived came through multiple channels. Sanguinius experienced visions of future events, including glimpses of the siege of Terra and his own prophesied death at the hands of Horus. These visions were confirmed through an unlikely source, Conrad Kurz, the traitor Primarch of the Night Lords, who the Lion had captured and brought to Macragge. Kurz possessed precognitive abilities similar to Sanguinius, though twisted by his madness and alignment with chaos. Through interrogation and observation of his visions, the loyalist Primarchs learned that Terra remained unconquered and their father still fought. Guilliman's reaction to this news was immediate horror and shame. Everything he had done in establishing Imperium Secundus was based on the assumption that Terra had fallen. Now he learned that his father lived, fought, and desperately needed reinforcement, while Guilliman had been building an alternative empire in Ultramar instead of finding ways to break through the Ruin Storm and reach Terra. The practical justifications for his actions remain valid. He truly had no reliable information and his contingency planning was strategically sound. But the emotional reality was devastating. He had prepared to replace his father while the Emperor still lived and bled defending humanity. The three Primarchs immediately began planning their departure for Terra. They would take their combined forces, break through the Ruin Storm regardless of cost, and reach their father before Horus could deliver the killing blow. This shared mission did much to repair the tensions between Guilliman and the Lion. Faced with a clear objective and desperate urgency, they stopped questioning each other's motivations and focused on practical cooperation. The journey through the Ruin Storm was harrowing, costing ships and lives, but they eventually reached Terra in time to participate in the final stages of the siege. Their relationship during the Siege of Terra itself was reportedly strong and collaborative. They fought together, coordinated their forces effectively, and demonstrated the kind of brotherhood the Emperor had intended when he created the Primarchs. They shared grief after Sanguinius fell to Horus, and again after the Emperor's internment on the Golden Throne. In the immediate aftermath of the heresy, despite trauma and exhaustion, they worked together during the Scouring to hunt down traitor forces and stabilize the shattered Imperium. Whatever tensions existed during Imperium Secundus appeared to have been resolved through shared combat and shared loss, but resolution in the moment does not mean issues were fully processed or permanently settled. Guilliman disappeared into stasis shortly after the Scouring ended, poisoned by Fulgrim's blade. The Lion disappeared when Caliban exploded, with no chance to discuss what happened or achieve closure. Neither brother had the opportunity to reflect together on Imperium Secundus from the perspective of time and distance. They never discussed what it meant, what it revealed about their characters, or how it should inform their future relationship. These unresolved conversations have waited 10,000 years to occur. When they meet now, Imperium Secundus will inevitably surface in their discussion. The Lion may want to understand Guilliman's true motivations during that period. Was it genuine contingency planning, or did some part of Guilliman welcome the opportunity to rule without his father's oversight? Guilliman may want to explain his reasoning and perhaps seek understanding or even absolution for decisions he has questioned ever since learning Terra still stood. Both will likely recognize that the situation was impossibly complex, that neither of them handled it perfectly, and that judging past decisions from present perspective is both necessary and unfair. The current circumstances create interesting parallels to Imperium Secundus that both Primarchs will surely notice. Once again, the Imperium is divided by a massive warp phenomenon, the cicatrix male dictum. Once again, one Primarch operates with significant autonomy in a region cut off from central authority, the Lion in Imperium Nihilus. Once again, questions arise about unity versus independence, centralized command versus regional autonomy, and how to coordinate efforts across impassable distances. The difference now is that both Primarchs have experienced leadership in ways that will inform their approach to these challenges. Guilliman has learned the limits of centralized authority through his struggles with imperial bureaucracy. He knows that trying to micromanage everything from Terra creates inefficiency and frustration. He will likely support the Lion operating independently in Imperium Nihilus because he understands that regional circumstances require regional solutions. He may even envy the Lion's freedom to act without bureaucratic oversight, though he is too responsible to abandon his own duties for such freedom. The Lion has learned the necessity of connection and cooperation through his isolation in Imperium Nihilus. Operating without support from the wider Imperium has taught him the value of coordination and resource sharing. He will likely appreciate Guilliman's willingness to provide what support can reach across the Great Rift, and he will recognize that neither of them can succeed alone against the threats they face. His transformation into a more empathetic and less prideful leader means he can accept Guilliman's authority in Imperial space without viewing it as a challenge to his own importance. The question of ambition will likely arise, though perhaps more subtly than it did during the heresy. Does Guilliman secretly wish to be Emperor, using his position as Lord Regent to build personal power? The evidence suggests not. He appears genuinely exhausted by his responsibilities and would welcome someone to share them. Does the Lion harbor resentment about Guilliman's administrative authority and his own lack of official recognition? Again, the evidence suggests not. The new Lion shows no interest in political power and seems content to operate as a military commander rather than a governmental leader. What both Primarchs likely want more than power is simply brotherhood. They want someone who understands their burdens, shares their perspective, and can offer genuine partnership rather than worship or fear. The loneliness of their positions may be the most significant factor driving their reunion. After 10,000 years of isolation, Guilliman surrounded by those who cannot comprehend his perspective, the Lion operating alone in the darkness, they finally have the opportunity to speak with an equal. This emotional need for connection may transcend any lingering tensions from their past. Their conversation will probably involve honest acknowledgement of past mistakes alongside forgiveness and understanding. Guilliman may admit that part of him did enjoy the power Imperium Secundus provided, even though his primary motivation was preserving humanity. The Lion may admit that his suspicions during that period were partly driven by his own tendency towards secrecy and his difficulty trusting others' stated motivations. Both can acknowledge that the heresy placed impossible pressures on all the loyal Primarchs, that they made decisions with incomplete information under desperate circumstances, and that judging those decisions harshly serves no productive purpose now. The practical outcome of this historical reckoning will likely be a clear division of responsibilities that plays to each Primarch's strengths while avoiding the appearance of divided loyalty. Guilliman continues as Lord Regent, managing the Imperium's administration and coordinating military efforts in Imperial space. The Lion operates as the primary military commander in Imperium Nihilus, with authority to make decisions without waiting for approval from Terra. They maintain communication through whatever channels prove reliable, or perhaps through Commander Dante, perhaps through other means, and coordinate on major strategic decisions while respecting each other's autonomy in their respective regions. This arrangement essentially formalizes the reality that already exists while adding the crucial element of coordination and mutual support. It acknowledges that the Imperium is too vast and too divided for single-point control, while ensuring that humanity's greatest champions work together rather than in isolation. It learns from the mistakes of Imperium Secundus by creating clear authority without the appearance of betrayal or alternative empire building. Most importantly, it gives both Primarchs what they desperately need, a brother who understands, supports, and shares the crushing burden of trying to save an empire that may already be beyond salvation. As Chapter 3 concludes, we understand the historical complexity underlying this reunion. These are not brothers meeting for the first time, but brothers reconnecting after shared trauma, unresolved tensions, and 10,000 years of separate development. The shadows of Imperium Secundus linger, but both Primarchs have grown beyond the limitations that created those shadows. Their meeting represents an opportunity not just for strategic coordination, but for genuine reconciliation and the formation of a partnership that might actually give humanity a chance. In Chapter 4, we will explore what this partnership could achieve, what challenges it will face, and what the reunion of two Primarchs means for the Imperium's desperate struggle for survival. Chapter 4, Two Primarchs, One Imperium. The strategic implications of two loyal Primarchs coordinating their efforts cannot be overstated in a galaxy where the Imperium faces existential threats on every front. For 10,000 years, humanity has fought without the Emperor's greatest champions, relying instead on mortal commanders, chapter masters, and lord commanders who possessed only a fraction of a Primarch's capabilities. The return of Guilliman already shifted the balance of power significantly, enabling the Indomitus Crusade and providing centralized leadership that had been absent since the heresy. The Lion's return doubles that advantage while adding capabilities that Guilliman cannot provide: operational flexibility in Imperium Nihilus, supernatural combat abilities for confronting demon princes and greater diamonds, and the tactical genius of the First Legion. Their coordination creates opportunities that neither Primarch could achieve alone. Guilliman possesses administrative authority over the entire Imperium and commands resources that dwarf what the Lion currently controls. He can authorize fleet deployments, redirect Forge World production, and mobilize entire Crusade forces. However, these resources struggle to reach Imperium Nihilus due to the Cicatrix Maledictum's interference with warp travel. The Lion operates on the dark side of the galaxy where resources are desperately scarce but where he has proven capable of achieving strategic victories through unconventional methods. Together, they can establish a two-front strategy that forces the Imperium's enemies to divide their attention and resources. Consider the Demon Primarchs, the corrupted brothers who now serve the Chaos Gods. Angron has already tasted defeat at the Lion's hands, banished back to the warp after his manifestation on the remains of Caliban. Magnus the Red leads the Thousand Suns in countless sorceress plots across the galaxy. Mortuion commands the Death Guard's plague fleets. Fulgrim oversees the Emperor's children's pursuit of excess and sensation. Perturabo directs the Iron Warrior's siege warfare from his Demon Forge. Each of these corrupted Primarchs represents a threat that would require massive Imperial resources to contain, let alone defeat. The presence of two loyal Primarchs changes the calculus significantly. The Lion has demonstrated that a loyal Primarch with proper preparation and favorable conditions can defeat a Demon Primarch in combat. His victory over Angron was not luck or accident but the result of superior tactics, environmental advantages, and the Emperor's shield's anti-demon properties. If Guilliman can provide intelligence about Demon Primarch movements, redirect resources to support the Lion's operations, and coordinate wider Imperial forces to create the conditions the Lion needs, they could potentially hunt and banish multiple traitor brothers. This represents a shift from reactive defense to proactive offense, from merely surviving chaos incursions to actively degrading chaos capabilities. The practical mechanics of their coordination will require innovation and adaptation. Standard astropathic communication across the Great Rift is unreliable at best. Messages that would normally take days or weeks instead take months or simply fail to arrive. Real-time coordination is impossible when signals cannot cross the divide. The solution likely involves multiple approaches working in parallel. Commander Dante, as Lord Regent of Imperium Nihilus, serves as a key connection point who maintains contact with both Primarchs. The Lion's message to Guilliman proves that secure communication is possible, even if difficult. They may establish relay stations at stable warp routes, use specialized astropaths with enhanced capabilities, or even employ Guilliman's Eldari contacts who possess superior understanding of webway navigation. The division of responsibilities will necessarily be clear and based on each Primarch's position and capabilities. Guilliman continues managing the Imperium's overall administration from Terra, maintaining the governmental structures that keep billions of worlds functioning. He coordinates the Indomitus Crusade fleets, manages relationships with the Adeptus Mechanicus and Ecclesiarchy, and handles the political complexities that come with his position as Lord Regent. The Lion operates as the supreme military commander in Imperium Nihilus, with full authority to make tactical and strategic decisions without waiting for approval from Terra. He identifies priority threats, allocates the limited resources available in the Dark Imperium, and personally leads operations against the most dangerous enemies. This arrangement plays to each Primarch's transformed character and learned preferences. Guilliman has reluctantly accepted that he must engage with Imperial bureaucracy and politics because no one else possesses the authority and capability to manage the Imperium's administrative nightmare. He hates this role but recognizes its necessity. The Lion has no interest in administration and would actively resist being drawn into political management. He wants to fight the Imperium's enemies directly, using his tactical genius and supernatural abilities to maximum effect. Their division of labor ensures neither brother wastes time on tasks better suited to the other. The symbolic importance of their reunion extends beyond practical military coordination. For 10,000 years, the Imperium has told itself stories about the Primarchs, that they were the Emperor's angels, that they sacrificed everything for humanity, that they would return in humanity's darkest hour. These stories sustained morale through countless wars and disasters. The return of Guilliman transformed myth into reality, proving that at least one Primarch still lived and fought for humanity. The Lion's return and subsequent coordination with Guilliman validates the deeper promise that the Emperor's sons would reunite, that brotherhood would triumph over division, that humanity's champions would stand together against the darkness. The Imperium's propaganda machinery will certainly exploit this reunion for morale purposes. Stories will spread through the Imperial Guard regiments about the two Primarchs planning humanity's salvation. Ecclesiarchy preachers will deliver sermons about the Emperor's angels working in perfect harmony. Planetary governors will point to the reunion as proof that the Imperium will endure despite the galaxy's horrors. Some of this propaganda will be cynical manipulation, but much of it will reflect genuine hope and relief. Soldiers fight harder when they believe victory is possible. Citizens endure greater hardships when they trust their leaders have a plan. The psychological impact of two Primarchs coordinating their efforts provides something the Imperium desperately needs, reason to believe the long war might actually be winnable, but we must be realistic about what two Primarchs can actually achieve against the threats facing humanity. The galaxy in the 42nd millennium is far more dangerous than it was during the Great Crusade or even the Horus Heresy. Chaos has had 10,000 years to corrupt entire sectors and establish permanent demonic strongholds in reality. The Tyranid hive fleets approaching the galaxy may number in the billions of ships, representing a threat that could consume all biomass in the Milky Way. The Necrons control technology so advanced it appears like magic, capable of extinguishing stars and moving planets. The Orcs gather in War so large they threaten to overwhelm entire segmentums through sheer numbers and aggression. Two Primarchs, no matter how capable, cannot be everywhere simultaneously. They cannot personally defend every threatened world or defeat every major enemy. What they can do is provide leadership that makes the difference between slow extinction and sustainable resistance. They can identify which battles matter most and concentrate force at critical points. They can inspire commanders throughout the Imperium to adopt better tactics and reject defeatist thinking. They can demonstrate through personal example that the Imperium's enemies are not invincible, that demon Primarchs can be banished, that darkness can be pushed back even if it cannot be permanently eliminated. The challenges they will face extend beyond external enemies to include internal Imperial politics and resistance to change. Guilliman has already experienced significant pushback from conservative factions that view his reforms as heretical. The Ecclesiarchy resents his clear disdain for the Imperial cult and fears he might eventually move against their institutional power. Elements within the Inquisition suspect he may have been corrupted during his resurrection by the Eldari. Some Space Marine chapters question the Primaris Marines he introduced, viewing them as replacements rather than reinforcements. The Adeptus Mechanicus jealously guards its technological monopolies against his efforts to increase efficiency and innovation. The Lion's approach to Imperial politics will likely be even more disruptive than Guilliman's measured reforms. The Lion has already demonstrated willingness to ignore established Dark Angels doctrine by working with the Risen. If he extends this pragmatic approach to other imperial institutions, he may clash with authorities who expect him to respect 10,000 years of established tradition. His preference for working in secrecy and making unilateral decisions without consulting bureaucratic channels will frustrate officials who view process and protocol as sacred. The tension between what the Imperium needs and what its institutions will accept creates friction that even Primarchs must navigate carefully. Their reunion also raises uncomfortable questions about the other Primarchs. Jagatai Khan disappeared into the webway pursuing Dark Eldar and has never returned. Lemon Russ departed into the Eye of Terror on a quest to find something that could heal the Emperor. Vulcan periodically appears and disappears according to his own mysterious purposes. Korax was last seen hunting traitor forces in the Eye of Terror, transformed into something that is no longer entirely human. Rogel Doran's status remains uncertain, with only his hand recovered after a battle with Chaos forces. If Guilliman and the Lion have returned, could others also return? Should the Imperium prepare for more reunions, or have the missing Primarchs been permanently lost to death, corruption, or transformation? The possibility of additional Primarch returns creates both hope and anxiety. Each loyal Primarch who returns multiplies the Imperium's capabilities and provides leadership that cannot be replaced by mortal commanders. But each return also requires integration into the existing command structure, creates new political complications, and raises questions about ultimate authority. If 5 or 6 loyal Primarchs eventually return, who leads? How do they coordinate without falling into the same conflicts that plagued them during the heresy? Can they learn from their past mistakes, or will old rivalries and disagreements resurface to undermine cooperation? For now, Guilliman and the Lion must focus on their own partnership and the immediate work before them. Their first face-to-face meeting will likely address both practical coordination and emotional reconciliation. They will discuss force deployments, resource allocation, priority threats, and communication protocols. They will also discuss Imperium Secundus, their relationship during the heresy, their grief for lost brothers, and their assessment of the Emperor's current state. These conversations will be private, away from observers and recording devices, allowing two brothers to speak with complete honesty about burdens no one else can truly understand. What they decide in these conversations will shape the Imperium's trajectory for centuries to come. If they establish effective coordination and genuine partnership, they create a template for how the Emperor's sons can work together despite the galaxy's vast distances and the Imperium's political complexities. If they fail to overcome past tensions or cannot find ways to coordinate across the Great Rift, they risk duplicating the heresy's tragedy, loyal brothers working at cross purposes while their enemies exploit the division. The stakes could not be higher, and both Primarchs surely understand this as they prepare to meet. The message the Lion sent, "Brother, we need to talk," encapsulates the situation perfectly. It acknowledges their relationship as brothers, not merely as military commanders or political leaders. It expresses urgency without panic, indicating serious matters require discussion but are not beyond addressing. It demonstrates the Lion's transformed character, his new willingness to reach out and communicate rather than operate in total isolation. Most importantly, it confirms that neither Primarch intends to face the galaxy's darkness alone when they finally have the opportunity to stand together. When historians eventually record this period, assuming the Imperium survives long enough to have historians, they will likely identify the reunion of Guilliman and the Lion as a pivotal moment. Not because it guaranteed victory, nothing in the grim darkness of the far future comes with guarantees, but because it represented the first time in 10,000 years that humanity's champions coordinated their efforts with clear communication and shared purpose. It demonstrated that brotherhood could survive betrayal, that transformation could improve rather than diminish, and that even in the darkest timeline, hope remained justified not through blind faith but through concrete actions by beings capable of changing the galaxy's course. The road ahead remains long and brutal. Imperium Nihilus will not suddenly become safe because the Lion operates there. Imperial space will not magically become efficient because Guilliman implements reforms. The Imperium's enemies will not conveniently wait while two Primarchs organize their forces and perfect their strategies. Every day brings new disasters, new losses, new reasons to despair. But every day also brings the possibility that two of the Emperor's greatest sons will make the difference between extinction and survival, between final darkness and continued struggle. For an Imperium that has known only decline for 10 millennia, even the possibility of sustainable resistance represents dramatic improvement. The galaxy may be darkness and death, but it is also resilience and defiance. Humanity survives not because the universe is kind but because humans refuse to surrender even when surrender would be logical. The Imperium endures not because its system works well but because trillions of souls continue fighting despite corruption, inefficiency, and suffering. Guilliman and the Lion embody this refusal to yield, transformed by their experiences into leaders who understand both the scale of the threats they face and the necessity of continuing the fight regardless. Their reunion does not promise victory, but it promises that the fight will continue with greater coordination, greater capability, and greater chance of success than humanity has known in living memory. In my view, what makes this reunion truly significant is not the strategic advantage or the symbolic importance, though both matter enormously. What makes it significant is the profoundly human element at its core, two brothers reconnecting after unimaginable time apart, offering each other the support and understanding that only they can provide. Yes, they are Primarchs, beings designed to be superior to normal humans in every measurable way. But they are also sons mourning their father, brothers grieving their lost siblings, and leaders carrying burdens that would crush anyone else. Their need for connection, for someone who truly understands their perspective, is fundamentally human regardless of their transhuman capabilities. I find it fascinating that both Primarchs had to be broken down and rebuilt before they could achieve the partnership they now demonstrate. Guilliman had to experience the horror of awakening to an Imperium that betrayed everything he believed in, had to learn that his administrative genius alone cannot fix systemic corruption, had to be humbled by the limits of his power. The Lion had to spend 10,000 years wandering between dimensions, had to confront the consequences of his pride and secrecy, had to learn empathy and emotional connection through isolation. Neither would have been ready for effective partnership immediately after the heresy. They needed transformation, and that transformation required suffering and time. Personally, I believe their reunion offers a lesson that extends beyond Warhammer's Grimdark setting into our own lives. That partnership requires maturity, that effective cooperation demands both self-knowledge and genuine respect for others, and that sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we have with the people who truly understand our struggles. Guilliman and the Lion are not perfect beings who have transcended human limitations. They are deeply flawed individuals who have learned to recognize their flaws, work around their limitations, and support each other through honest communication. That is as valuable as any military advantage they provide, because it models the kind of leadership humanity actually needs, not infallible heroes, but mature adults willing to acknowledge mistakes, learn from experience, and coordinate with others rather than insisting on unilateral control. Their story reminds us that even in the darkest circumstances, brotherhood and cooperation offer hope that isolated struggle cannot provide.